outside of God's plan, not wait for God's time, and had a relationship with a woman who was not his wife, and a child was born, right? Outside of Abraham's life, you can think about many other scenarios that we go through. We've seen and know and have walked with and have family members that maybe have allowed an addiction to money or alcohol or some other thing enter their lives. We all know and have been part of, and maybe in our own history, people that have made mistakes that maybe have resulted in them having to serve some prison time, maybe profound mistakes in parenting, the abuse of a child, or the abuse of a wife, and all of these things happen in the course of a life. Here is the glorious truth of the gospel, right? That in terms of our relationship with God, these things can be confessed. And the glorious truth of the gospel is that because of what Christ has done, all of these sins, all of these things that we have done outside of God's will have been dealt with on the cross, and we can come to Him for forgiveness. This is a good one here.
Some sins are deeper rooted than others.
This is the one I assigned to Abraham.
Yeah.
And the glory of the gospel is that one day we can stand before God in the righteousness of Christ as if we've never sinned, right? That is the truth that we gather and celebrate week after week after week after week. In terms of our relationship with God, we stand before Him as if none of these things ever happened. That is the vertical relationship. There is still the horizontal relationship. And as I turn this over, when we think about our relationships with one another, there's some deep and abiding evidence. The sin is gone, right? The sin has been dealt with, it's been repented of, but there is evidence of what has happened. So that Abraham, who made a decision to have a relationship with a woman other than his wife, there is still an aftermath of that to deal with that is not great from a human perspective, right? For our brothers and sisters who have dealt with addiction of one kind or another and have repented of that and have walked away from that, there is an aftermath of those addictions that they continue to deal with this side of heaven, right? There are still deep and abiding scars that they are working through and challenges that they face in their relationships with people. In the case of a parent who has abused a child, again, that sin can be forgiven, it can be dealt with, but there are deep and abiding consequences of that we continue to deal with this side of heaven. That's why in the room up above us, as we get the chance to teach the teens, we beg them and implore them to follow Christ and to do what is right in their life, not because God's grace is not sufficient to cover their sins, it absolutely is, but because of this, right? Because we all live with this and we know what this is like. To deal with the aftermath of sin in our life, the ongoing consequences of sin. I would submit to you that this is what we're seeing as we watch this scene play out, as this man of God has to look at his 16-year-old son and say, "You must leave." The fact that Abraham did something outside of God's plan for his life, I believe from everything that we've studied with Abraham, was dealt with long ago, right? And he stood before God as if he had never sinned. But there were still these human consequences, this human aftermath of this sin that had to be dealt with. I think there's a danger sometimes as we present the gospel that we present to people that if you come to Christ, all of your problems will be solved, right? Your deepest and most profound problem will be solved. You will stand before God one day as if you had never sinned. But we still have these things to deal with this side of heaven, right? Does that make sense? I think that's what we're seeing play out here in Abraham's life. And here's the beautiful thing, as difficult as all of that is, and you guys have already spoken to this, as difficult as all of that is, as painful as it is, even in the midst of all of that, God is still sovereign. And even in the midst of all of that pain and all of these messes that we have made, He continues to work His plan in spite of our best efforts to mess it up. And at the end of it, maybe this side of heaven, we get to see the beauty from the ashes. If not, then in eternity, we will get to see the beauty from the ashes, because he really is working all things together for the good, in spite of our best efforts to mess it all up.